Morning, all.
Morning, Art.
How you doing, Isaac?
Oh, pretty good, pretty good. How about yourself?
Oh, not bad. Not bad. It's way different. Hey, Margie.
Hi.
Way different day today than yesterday. Yesterday we had 3 inches of snow on the ground.
I know. It was, I did not expect that. I was pretty surprised when I woke up.
Yeah, it was gone by noon.
I'm so jealous we didn't get a single flake or drop in Watrous.
Did you have rain 2 days ago? We had significant rain. We had like all day.
Just wind.
Oh, well, I'm glad that they got some precipitation because we really needed it. It was getting pretty dry.
Yep.
Okay. All right. I'm going to check out here for a few minutes, and it looks like everything's together. We got like 30 people say they're going to be here. Surprising to me. Oh, well.
And Margie, I made you a host and Arthur co-host, and the stream is going. So I don't think you need anything else from me, but if you do, just let me know.
Okay.
I'll stick around and keep the meeting running in the background. So hopefully I'll hear if something comes up.
Great. Thank you, Isaac, for your help. I greatly appreciate it.
No problem.
Morning, everyone. This is Arthur. I see people are slowly titrating in, so we'll give it a couple of minutes. And thank you so much for being with us today. And we'll join you in a few.
Good morning, Art.
Well, good morning, Matt. How are you?
Doing well. How are you today?
Thank you. You're going to see a technical presentation today. Yeah, titrating, Michael Robb. That means they're coming in drip by drip by drip by drip.
Well,
I enjoyed your word choice.
That's
Yeah.
right. I will fasten my seatbelt.
Okay. Okay. Okay, waiting for the magic number of 20, and then we can get started. Because the most important people are here, and those are the ones who are going to be making our presentation today. So, good morning, everybody. Arthur O'Donnell with the Public Regulation Commission, joined by Margie Tetro and our intrepid IT guy, Isaac, who's not really an IT guy, but he helps us with all this stuff. Glad that you could make it. I know that a month goes by actually pretty quickly. But we really appreciate your committing the time to do this. This is important stuff, and we really want to make sure that we have good participation. So Margie has the agenda up on the screen today, and we're going to start with a little poll as to once we decide what we're going to do and what these technical requirements should be, where do people think they should best reside? The choices are kind of in the interconnection rule. It says here in manual, I have an update on that, whether there's a technical guidelines document or something other. So we'll be interested in your both conversation about that, and we'll take a little vote just to see, and that will help. And then we'll have a presentation on the advanced inverter functions and settings from Travis Storr, Brian Liddick, Mike Robb, and Midhat Mavazi. And then open it up to questions and discussion, and then discuss a path forward, which is essentially what do we need to do to make this happen. Before we begin on all that, I just wanted to give those of you who are interested an update on two other commission proceedings that advanced inverters are part and parcel of. Of course, we have the interconnection proceeding. And as many of you who are following that know, we had gone through the big stakeholder process last year, and we're not able to reach agreement on a lot of significant issues, including the actual revision of the rule and the manual that exists and hasn't been updated since 2008. The commission proceeded with a formal comments taking, and it became apparent that people felt uncomfortable proceeding unless the actual elements of the manual were visible and available for people to comment on. And I can understand that. The problem is that we weren't able to get to a place where we could revise the manual. So the commission determined that based on recommendations from a few parties, including IREC, that we're not going to have a separate manual going forward, that the technical provisions, the steps for interconnection review and process are going to be built into the rule. And so the commission has a docket, which is 21-00266 for furthering this, and has laid out a schedule, which will include a workshop on April 14th. So if you can put that on your calendars, if you've been involved in the previous proceeding, you'll get a notice of that. It's embodied into the new notice of proposed rulemaking that's coming out from the commission, but I want to give you a heads up on that. Generally, we really want to hear about whether what we've come up with is complete and sufficient. We will take positive comments and suggestions for how to make this happen. And then there'll be the formal series of comments, responses, a hearing, and then hopefully close the record in June and be able to move forward with a decision on that. So I'm going to call your attention again. The docket is 21-00266 UT in the interconnection, and Hans Mueller is the hearing officer that's been assigned. Actually, he's the staff attorney that's been assigned to this case. So you'll be seeing that in the formal commission process. Yesterday,
Arthur, this is Tayoko.
Yeah, go ahead. Hi, Tayoko.
Morning. Is that virtual? Is that going to be a virtual workshop?
Yeah, we're not prepared to have anything in person yet. The commission really doesn't have very good workshop space. There's a little hearing room, but I would anticipate that at some point this year, we're going to start meeting in person for some things, but this will be a Zoom call. Okay, any other questions on that? No. Okay.
Hey, Arthur.
Yeah, Mira.
Hey, I was just wondering, maybe as a background to the poll that you're just about to put up, I'm wondering if it will be more helpful to provide the procedural implications for the two options, like where the, at least to me, where the specs lie is probably less crucial, as long as there's commission oversight and stakeholder input. So perhaps what are your thoughts on procedurally on how the specs will be adapted in the rule or into the utility interconnection technical requirements?
Okay, let me get to that after I have one more announcement, which is yesterday the commission began its consideration of a final order and revised rule for the community solar program implementation. And that, for those of you who have been involved in that, has also been a year-long process that began with the adoption of a state law last year, the Community Solar Act, and commission stakeholder process and a formal process for taking comments on how to get this community solar program 200 megawatts of smaller scale up to 5 megawatt projects located throughout the state in the 3 investor-owned utility service territories off the ground. Under the statute, SB 84, the commission had until April 1st to adopt policies. Miraculously, we're on track for that, although it is a very complex set of issues that the commission has had to deal with. We did have an abbreviated stakeholder process last summer that helped clarify major issues, and then the commission is just having to make a number of calls on certain policy issues as well as the actual language of the rule. So we spent about an hour and a half in the formal commission business meeting yesterday going through the order, and we'll complete that process next week, and hopefully the commission will actually be able to take a vote. So I would hope that if you have a particular interest in community solar, that you tune in for that, because it's been a good discussion. The commissioners are very good at asking us why we're coming up with the recommendations that we are, and so that hopefully that will help explain. There will be a lot of loose threads, of course, right? Because we've had to move pretty quickly on this, and there will be things that come up as we go into the implementation of the program, which will include a competitive solicitation for projects, as I said, up to 5 megawatts, allocated among the 3 investor-owned utility territories. There will be processes for vetting the eligibility of subscribers to these programs, particularly low-income subscribers, and a whole host of other implementation issues. There is a subsequent implementation docket, I'm sorry, I don't have the number in front of me, that we'll be using, and I anticipate that we'll probably be scheduling some kind of workshops. I know that we'll have a workshop in June to go over a draft request for proposals in the competitive solicitation. We have an outside contractor called Cadmus who's creating those documents and is working with the investor-owned utilities, but the commission will be hiring a program administrator to carry out that solicitation and to oversee the program for the next 2 years, pretty much, until we go back to the legislature with a report in November 2024 on how things progressed and what kind of changes might be necessary, whether the program should continue, expand, retract, whatever. We're going to need all of your input in terms of making this a success. It's really important for the state of New Mexico to be able to offer the benefits of renewable energy to all utility customers, no matter what their economic circumstances. The legislature has directed this program, and we're doing our damnedest to make sure that it happens. So, any questions on that? No. Margie, do you have any administrative issues? Oh, I'm sorry, Dylan has his hand raised.
Dylan, go ahead, Dylan.
Thanks, Art. I just had a quick question. You mentioned the PRC is reviewing the recommendations from the staff, and they're asking questions. Is that open to the public? And did you say that happened yesterday?
Yeah, it's every week. There's a regular business agenda meeting. It starts at 9:30. Members of the public can view it on YouTube. In fact, you can go onto YouTube, and if you're really good at search functions, you can see the recording of yesterday's meeting. It did go on forever. Probably the best way to do it is to go onto the PRC's website and then click on the live meetings button, which ought to take you to the recording. Is that correct? Is Isaac still with us? Is that the best way to access?
Yeah, I'll put in a chat a link to a page that has like just a listing of all the recordings of both open meetings, hearings, all PRC things that are live streamed on that link I just sent. That'd be the easiest place to find stuff, most likely.
Great, thank you. Did I see somebody else have a question?
If not, I just had one more. You mentioned Cadmus was working on an RFP and getting input from the utilities. Are they getting input from industry as well?
Well, we have the body of information that has come through the interconnection, the community solar. So, for instance, a core component of the RFP document will be the evaluation criteria and the scoring, and that derived directly from the stakeholder group, in particular the ad hoc group that Kevin Cray's organization kind of convened and provided the commission with the set of minimum criteria and kind of a scoring sheet. The commission has made a little bit of some slight changes to that, just to emphasize some things other than others, but I would say that it's pretty much 95% of that. And then it's really the documentation. So the workshop in June will be the opportunity to review the draft of the materials, which we hope to finalize in June. So that would be the best opportunity to have a public comment on it.
Thank you.
So I have two things. This is Margie. One, you will all find the presentation from the meeting a month ago in the OneDrive folder for this subgroup. And then today's presentation that Travis, Brian, Mike, and Midhat put together is in the folder for today's meeting. So you can find those at your leisure, but those are there. One other question, Justin Robert Martin, welcome. I see we have a new player that's joined us. Can you please introduce your organization or who you're with?
Sure. My name is Justin Martin. I'm a technical executive with the Electric Power Research Institute. I'm just sitting in for Tom Key today.
Great. Thanks for being here.
Yeah,
Sure.
thanks for joining us, Justin. Are you in Palo Alto or somewhere else?
I used to be, but I'm in Knoxville with Tom.
No, so they've really decentralized. It used to be everything was in Palo Alto. I guess nobody can afford to live there anymore.
And there's no state taxes on income here.
Ah, well, there you go.
Um,
Move to New Mexico. We're going to give a tax rebate. We have so much money, you know.
I'm equal opportunity.
Justin, I'm happy to add you to our distribution list. If you might send me your email or put it in the chat, I'm happy to
Put it in the chat.
one. Great. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Great.
That's it.
Anybody
from
else
me.
have any kind of business stuff? Okay, hearing none. Let's take up Midhat's suggestion. I don't know what the best thing is. You know, I have a difficulty with putting real technical or real economic information into a commission rule, because that means that if something changes, that you have to go through this whole process for rulemaking changes. But you know, one way of dealing with it is to just reference these standards, which of course you would do anyway in the rule, and then have a separate document where they can be referred to. In the past, that might have been an attachment to the tariff, or however the state deals with those things. We don't really have an interconnection tariff in New Mexico. We know that the previous version of these rules were embodied both in a rule and then in a separate manual. And the manual was kind of like telling, you know, the agreements, a set of agreements between the utility and the interconnection customers that included some technical specifics, but that there were separate technical guidelines. If there's somebody here from the utilities that can address that in terms of kind of like what kind of documentation you have. I'm indifferent, but I do have this issue that I don't like to put things that are likely to change into a rule, and changes are inevitable, especially with as standards are evolving. So I'll take any kind of, before we take a poll, I'll take any kind of discussion on this matter. And I see that we have Frank Andazola from PNM on. I know that we have Travis, who represents SPS, and there may be somebody else that could speak to kind of like where you think from a utility point of view is the best place to have this information. And then from people who might have to revert to this information, like inverter manufacturers or the installers, where you think the best place for this stuff to reside might be. Anybody? Don't trip over
This is
each other.
Leslie Padilla. I have a
Oh,
quick
you're a
question.
lawyer. I don't know if I want to hear from a lawyer.
Well, you're gonna
Yeah,
hear from
okay.
me, unfortunately. I unfortunately have not been following this proceeding that carefully, but I guess that I think my answer as a lawyer would be, what is the import of these advanced inverter? Are these guidelines for the utilities? Or are
These
they
are the
rules?
mandatory functions that will be required in all new inverters installed after March 28th. I think we changed the date to March 28th, 2023.
So this is the discussion that's happening, that's going to be this group's recommendation, correct?
Yes, correct.
Okay. I'll give it some thought about whether if these are mandatory, you know, and I need to make sure this is consistent with what our position has been in the interconnection rulemaking. I'll think about it. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay, and we could actually defer actually taking a poll until after the presentation. That might help some people. Margie's shaking her head yes, so let's do that. Let's kind of like allow Travis and group to present kind of what we're talking about, because that's going to help formulate what we need to do about it.
So Arthur, to Dylan's question though, you might also mention if these guidelines or if these standards end up being in the technical guidelines, what is the mechanism regulatorily for that? I think Dylan was asking procedurally and regulatorily what happens in each of those situations, whether it's part of the rule, it's part of tech guidelines or other. Can you speak to if it's part of the technical guidelines, is that written as a requirement that the PRC requests, or how does that handled normally?
Well, basically, I think no matter where it lives, there's going to have to be some way of verifying that new inverters installed into the system are capable of these functions, right? And so that's really kind of where it comes down to. And that doesn't matter whether it's in the rule or in technical guidelines or just in a letter to the manufacturers that say, hey, everybody, that kind of thing. So I'm willing to wait until after we actually hear what the specs under consideration might look like and then have this conversation.
Sounds good.
Okay. All right, Travis, I see that you're here. If you want to take over the screen and share your slides. And thank you very much for the group effort in putting this together. It's really appreciated.
There it is. I really appreciate the opportunity, Art. Thank you very much. Am I coming through just fine?
You're fine, but you're not sharing your screen yet.
Yeah, yep, no problem. Share, there we go. And start from the beginning. And can you see that first slide, proposal for autonomous functions?
Yes, thank you.
Great, all right, yeah. Again, I really appreciate the opportunity to present here, and looking forward to discussing further. Here's just another one of my basic presentations, just simple black and white. So my name is Travis Dorr. I work for Xcel Energy on the DER integration team as an electrical engineer. This presentation is for a proposal for autonomous functions of IEEE-1547, 2018. And then I'll go over an outline of the presentation. So these are proposed assignments, functions, and settings. So we reviewed last month what performance categories are, what autonomous functions are, and you can see a list of those there. And so what I'm trying to do is provide, a proposed set of assignments, default activation statuses of the various functions, and then for those that are enabled, what kind of default settings we would want to have for those smart inverters. And so for performance category assignments, we have two different types of categories. We've got normal and abnormal. For normal, there's A and B, and then for abnormal, there's 1, 2, and 3. And so the proposal includes classifying rotating machines. That includes both induction and synchronous generators as category A, and then for inverters, category B for the normal performance categories. And then for the abnormal performance categories, this proposal includes for rotating machines, category 1 and for inverters category 3. I guess I should have left that last bullet maybe just in my notes, just a note to myself where we should address cases when an applicant has an inverter that can only meet category 2. I think that's going to be a pretty small percentage of installations. So not like we have to, maybe necessarily go too far into that. Just something to keep in mind moving forward.
Just for, if I can just interject, is that when we last met, Travis had a fairly detailed explanation of what all this is. And that material is available in the shared drive that Margie referenced, just so that in case you need a refresher course on it. But certainly, just, don't assume that we know everything here, Travis. Or remember.
Yes, sir. No problem. And vice versa. No, I'm just kidding. Okay. Yeah. And yeah, thank you for sharing that information, Arthur. And yeah, always feel free to interrupt me on any of these slides. It makes for good discussion. And in fact, I think for each slide, I'm just gonna maybe ask the gentleman that I was working with this week on this slide deck who helped to contribute to it. I'll be asking them, I think it was Brian, Mike, and Midhat, if they have anything to say, I'll kind of pause when I think I'm done with the slide and give them an opportunity to add anything that they feel should be added. So I think that's it for this slide. Moving on to the next slide, which is for the various functions. So like I said, last month, we kind of walked through what these functions are. And then, yeah, when I met with the group this week to review which ones should be enabled or disabled, I kind of just had it simply saying disabled or enabled, but we wanted to provide a little more clarity as to which categories. And these differences where we're pointing out the categories, I plan to have that explained on each slide. So basically, I'm going to go through each one of these functions with its own slide. That's kind of my goal. Except for maybe anti-islanding, I might have skipped that one because that one's fairly straightforward. That's been the de facto function for inverters for decades now, I think.
Hey, Travis, this is Steve from SMA. On your disturbance ride-through for frequency and voltage, maybe you should also put N trips because it's kind of a separate table for trip settings. Ride through is a capability based on whether you're category 1 and 3.
Yeah.
Trips has settings, parameter settings associated with it.
Okay, so yeah, right here where it says voltage disturbance ride through, I should put and trips, right?
Yeah, and trip.
Okay. Yeah, I agree. Yep, I'll do that. So I'll update this the slides and I can send them out after this meeting if that's okay.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just gonna actually type that out real quick. Thank you. Okay, so let's see. Yeah, for so volt var we wanted enabled. At constant power factor we want disabled. Volt watt we want enabled for category B. Watt bar and constant reactive power control disabled. I had enabled shown for the ride throughs, but they have to be enabled. The standard says that is shall trip. Just getting back to Steve's point that or that is shall ride through. Sorry. Various voltage and frequency disturbances. And then for enter service, that's pretty basic, enabled. And then for ramp rate, I had enabled, but I think that it's not always applicable. So we wanted to kind of mention if applicable.
Okay, and Travis, this is Arthur. So when you say disabled, it means that the functionality is built in, it's just turned off for perhaps some later circumstance that might require it to be enabled?
Yes, sir. Yeah, good question. Okay, moving to the next. So the rest of these slides is going to basically go one by these functions. So the next slide is going to be constant power factor control. So even though this proposal includes disabling the constant power factor function, there are situations where it may be preferred instead of the volt var function, which is the next slide. So for those settings with constant power factor instead of volt var, we want to make some recommendations on how to do constant power factor control. So this is a good example right here shown on this slide where you know we want to require it to be disabled unless otherwise specified in the interconnection agreement, but also for any DER that don't have an interconnection agreement. I just want to make a recommendation on a constant power factor, and it seems like the default standard in the utilities, as far as I know, has been a negative 0.98. So negative means that it's absorbing VARs. So using a negative 0.98 power factor should be used. So I didn't mention the different sizes of DER, but basically from 0 kVA to 10 MVA. DER that doesn't have an IA, that's the power factor that should be used. Now, there's also the consideration for going even lower than that, like 0.95, 0.96 for higher penetration areas, meaning feeders with multiple large solar gardens. And those will have system impact studies providing a power factor. Anything else to add on this slide?
This is Brian with IREC. I've got to jump for another call, so thanks for taking it, Travis. But just wanted to mention that, if I guess the same would be true for volt var. I don't know if you're going to mention this when you got to volt var, but volt var settings could also be changed via system impact study. So basically, the system impacts study could select the function that is used, which could be like any of the 4 voltage regulating functions.
I will make that note after the meeting to that slide. Thank you, Brian. And on that note, I'll head to the next slide, which is volt var. So like I mentioned on that function slide, this would be enabled for categories A and B. If anybody has the IEEE 1547 2018 standard, please see table 8. You'll see that this matches with that. Basically, the standard has default settings. It has a range of allowable settings, and then it has basically its recommended default settings, and that's what's shown on this slide. So we're recommending to just go with the standards default settings. And then a note I took during our meeting earlier this week that I wanted to share as well is to see section 5.3.3, where it says all DER shall autonomously adjust the reference voltage with the VREF being equal to the low pass filtered measured voltage, and that the time constant shall be set to 300 seconds. I didn't know if I should discuss that any further. Does anybody have anything to add to this one?
Just
Yeah,
explain to me, just explain to me why 300 seconds, what that means.
This is Brian, real quick before I jump off. That is actually an option, whether that's turned on or not. So that's the autonomously adjusting VREF. If you don't turn that on, then your VREF just remains the same, which would usually be like your nominal voltage. And the 300 seconds is just kind of like the look back window. That's 5 minutes. So you just average the voltage over the last 5 minutes, and that would be your VREF. So your average voltage as it changes, due to other operations on the distribution system, you could basically reframe where your volt-var function works around. And so that can kind of help it settle to that particular point on the distribution system.
Yep.
But by default, it is not turned on.
So let's see, should I add anything to this slide to that effect, or is it good as is? It seems to be good as is.
Yeah, I think, kind of like when we get to actually presenting this to the commission, there'll need to be a narrative, right? That, explains this stuff, because we really do not have technical decision makers.
Travis, you might just make a note in the comments that look back function by default is turned off. And that's probably sufficient for us, but that might be something we want to talk about. I don't think you have to change the slide. Maybe just put a note in the comments.
Okay, yeah, that the look back function is by default turned off. And we want that to be turned off, or we want it on and set to the
I would say we keep the default that it's turned off, unless there's like a system impact study or something that specifically says, oh, here's something that we could address by turning that on.
Got it. Thank you. Okay. All right, moving on to the next function, which is the volt watt function. This is required for category B, not category A. And again, please see the table 10 from the standard. And again, this is a the default settings recommended by the standard. Any questions here, and or anything I should add? I just want to make sure I'm giving enough time and not moving too quickly. Okay, moving to the next slide, which is for watt var. We want this one disabled. Just figure I'd kind of give it its own slide just to point out that that we should require this function to be disabled. And then it's going to be the same thing with the next slide. We also have this listed as disabled, and just wanted to point out that we're wanting to proceed with disabling this particular function.
Yeah, and Travis, just a note that these last two functions that we're suggesting be disabled, we're actually favoring the other functions that are enabled. These are, they're not necessarily mutually exclusive, but you wouldn't want to necessarily use them at the same time.
Right.
So what we're saying is we're going to favor the other ones because we think they're better.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Yep, I agree. Next one is the one that kind of required a bit more attention. And to the gentleman that I met with earlier this week, I'm just noting that, you know, what I presented was based on some work that I was doing in Minnesota. I do this in Minnesota and Colorado as well. And I wanted to present to the group the MISO recommendations. And it was asked, you know, like, why is MISO recommending these particular settings here? So, and then I just wanted to note what the standard is recommending for default standards, and then what MISO is recommending for default standards. So where there are no parentheses, it's the same from both the IEEE and the MISO recommended default settings. Oh, let's see. I do want to also note that it's the same for inverter and rotating machines. Rather than having two separate tables that really say the same thing, one for inverter and one for rotating, I just combine them into one table. So just wanted to note that and, you know, ask the group to, you know, consider that we have the same settings for inverter and rotating. You know, do we want to change that? And if so, you know, why would we want to change it? So yeah, just a reminder that
so Travis, this Steve.
Yeah.
So on rotating machines, you're saying that's category 1. And on inverters, you're asking category 3, maybe category 2 on special situations. So how do these trips, I guess maybe offline, I'll compare your trip settings with the category 3 trip table versus category 1. So over voltage 2, 1.2. Yeah, that's all right. Over voltage 1, 13. These look like pretty close to category 3.
And Steve, one thing that we should point out, Travis, we should make a note of this, that that table 13 from the 2018 standard was revised in 2020. There's a 1547A amendment that came out in 2020 because it was determined that some of those category 3 ranges of adjustment were too restrictive. We needed to, yeah, you remember that. So that 13 that shows up in the clearing time for OV1, that's the default, but that was really from the 2018 standard. And as you know, the 2 shown there for MISO was actually outside of the range of applicability for,
right.
Yeah. So that's been changed now. We should probably make a note of that here.
Thank you.
The other thing too, your MISO, you know, so you're using IEEE category 3 values for the clearing time. But if you look at your MISO, you go to 0.32 for under voltage 2. So you may be now kind of interfering with the category 3 ride-through capability requirements if you set your clearing times too low compared to the category 3 clearing times. Did you overlay this with the category 3 ride through capability to see if your trip settings are kind of tripping within the ride through capability?
I did not. MISO did. And yeah, I just wanted to share what MISO is recommending. And again, that's in Minnesota, and I believe that this is the Southwest Power Pool, right? I think that Southwest Power Pool would have a separate guide for their area, similar to MISO, to consider.
Okay, I'm gonna have to step back just a little bit, Travis, and just say my interpretation of the difference here between the standard and what MISO is using is that shorter amount of time before trip and a slightly tighter band of difference from normal, right, before there's a trip. And so what are the circumstances in MISO that require or dictate that there be these differences?
Yeah. So you'll notice that really the big difference really is with the UV. So the under voltage setting has the most impact on the bulk power system stability. So they wanted that to be tighter to provide better stability on the bulk power system. I'm not sure if I answered Steve's question though. It was a good question.
Well, yeah, so I'm looking at the under voltage ride through for category 3. So we're looking at 20 seconds at less than 0.88 in mandatory operation, 0.88 PU. You got to ride through for 20 seconds.
Yeah, you're looking at the standard right now?
Yeah, I'm looking at 1547. And a ride through for category 3, when you get to 0.88 PU and less, down to 0.7 PU, it's mandatory operation in that range for 20 seconds. And you would be setting, or MISO would be setting the trip at 0.7 seconds. If I'm reading this table correctly, right?
Oh, you're setting it at 5 seconds for 0.7 voltage. But yeah, you're right.
Yeah. So Michael, how would that, I can't remember the standard without rereading it. When you set a trip limit, because trips have priority, when you set the trip limit within the ride through capability, you trip based on the trip limit, right? Not.
That's right. And I have to admit, I was not aware of that amendment. I found out about that while we were talking about this table this week.
Yeah, me too.
So yeah, so I don't know how that was harmonized with the ride through requirements. You've raised a good point, Steve, that that 5 second MISO trip in theory violates the minimum ride through requirement in 1547, but they're both 1547 allowed. So I'm going to have to dig into that a little bit more and figure out how that was harmonized.
Yeah, me too.
Well, it wasn't. I mean, in 1547, we said, okay, here's your trip adjustment ranges. And we widened those out. All we did was change the trip tables. We didn't change the ride through capability, and we didn't change the requirements that say which one has precedence. So if somebody decides to set their trip within the ride through capability, then it will trip.
Yeah, and the ride through is a design criterion. It's not a system performance requirement, right?
Right.
Okay, so that's how that works. The inverter has to be able to ride through for 20 seconds, but we're not going to use that capability. We're going to trip it at 5.
Right.
Okay.
Would you think that 5 is better?
Oh, I couldn't tell you. I guess it depends on your system and your studies. It seems like everything I've heard that, especially larger systems, they don't want them to trip off that fast. We get like into IEEE 2800, they want it to ride through, as much as possible.
Yeah, but that's that transmission interconnection. Yeah.
Yeah, but you could have a fairly dominant system on a distribution system too. And now you set it to 5 seconds, it trips off real quick, and you have all your DERs that, total up a sum aggregate. They all start tripping off because they're all set the same way, right?
Yeah, I guess what I would say is, first of all, 5 seconds is really not that fast, as you know. I mean, the default was much, much longer than that. But most of these events that are causing undervoltages like this should be cleared by one mechanism or another within like the 2 to 3 second time frame. And if we have an undervoltage that persists for 5 seconds, as I understand it, and I haven't been involved in all these conversations, but the system operators were very concerned about saying a DER, at 0.5 per unit voltage could still be hanging on 20 seconds later. They thought, no, that's writing into something that's clearly outside of the pale of where the system should be operating. So we want the DER to get off faster. And that's the actual reason why the 1547A amendment was created.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to interpret this conversation as this is an area that might depend on local circumstance, right? And each system might actually require a different level for the actual clearing time setting, as opposed to what the functionality is capable of doing. So we're going to note that, and then kind of like we'll need to have each of our utilities weigh in on their set of what they think should happen here.
Yeah, I would also want someone like, I think it's the Southwest Power Pool to weigh in, to provide a guide for their recommended settings. Does that sound right? Am I calling out the right entity?
Yeah, you're talking about like a balancing authority or somebody like that should weigh in on this.
Yeah, the MISO of New Mexico.
Yeah, it's probably more important for frequency than voltage, but yeah, that is always a good precaution.
Yeah, Travis, and I'm going to jump ahead to Art's survey a little bit since we're dwelling on this. So what I recommend is in the rule, you put the main requirements, and even you can refer to the default settings in some of these tables that you're doing, but then make sure it's clear that each site may have specific parameters set differently per the interconnection requirements for that site. And what EPRI is creating is what we call the ERP file, and they're going to create a database, which is utility required profiles. And the way 1547 is set up, it allows for us as manufacturers to get, or installers to get a settings specific for that site. So what I'm trying to say is you don't want to say in the rule, these are the only settings for each of these parameters for all these functions, because a site may require something, a particular site may require something a little bit different based on the study and needs of that site. So you need to allow the flexibility of the utility to specify, hey, make this parameter this setting. And the rule might say, well, here's the default, but the utility will specify something different through the ERP file for that site.
Right. These are just by default, but are subject to change based on like a system impact study, right?
Yes.
Right.
All parameters are allowed to be specified by the utility based on the needs of that site. And our equipment is set up in a way that the installer then would program it with those specific parameters.
Right, just remaining cognizant of the ranges of adjustability specified in the standard.
Right.
But
Steve,
otherwise, yeah,
Steve,
totally.
Steve, you say this ERP file is work in progress. Sounds like a lot of different settings. What's the anticipation of when it might be usable?
Okay, so it's called the utility required profile. It the acronym is ERP, URP, and there is a first release that has been out now for a year, and we are now in the process of working with EPRI we sent that out. We had some utilities complete it. We had manufacturers do their version. We found that there was some issues, misunderstandings of what values needed to be put in there. So it's basically a spreadsheet, a CSV file of all these functions and labels for these functions and the parameters and the adjustable values. And then the utility says, okay, for this parameter, for this function, here's what I want it to be set at. And then the manufacturer would read that in and use that to set the equipment and provide them verification back in that same format that, okay, here's the as set file that you compare to your specified settings file. So they do have a draft out there. You can refer to it. I expect probably by the end of this year, we will have a final released, cleaned up version of that. And that's just a tool. It's not a requirement. It's just a tool to allow the exchange of a common format of these parameter settings, knowing that there's going to be various states with different settings they want, different functions they want activated. And even within the utilities territory, there could be specific site differences. So there is no one setting for all.
Yeah.
We have
Yeah.
variability.
That would really simplify that exchange of information from utilities to installers, right? Like
Right.
really help expedite the process and provide a clean, common format to exchange, right?
Yep.
Great, thank you. That's helpful information for us.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so more to come on this one, huh? So yeah, a couple other notes that I had to share on this one is, you know, like what you were saying, Art, need to coordinate with the various New Mexico utilities, also with transmission. And I'm gonna dig a little bit more, just like Mike said, he was gonna do on why did, you know, MISO deviate so much from the standards default settings, and what problems are they trying to solve with this? So moving on to the next one, which is also abnormal. It's abnormal frequency. In this case, the MISO recommended settings were the same as the standards, and that's what is shown on this table. Let's see, anything else on that one? Yeah, the same note applies that you mentioned, I think, Steve, on the last slide, where rotating is category 1, inverter is category 3. Please note that we have the same settings for inverter and rotating shown here. So rather than making two tables, combine it into one. And then for anybody looking at the standard, see table 18. And,
yeah, what's nice about frequency is there's not, I think category 1, 2, and 3 are all the same frequency.
Yeah.
So yeah, you don't have the same issue here as you do with voltage.
Yep.
Can you tell me if this is any different from what was traditionally allowed?
Traditionally, you mean?
Yeah, under the previous 1547, right?
Well,
yeah.
I mean, these frequency ranges look pretty much like what everybody's operated under forever.
These frequency settings are wider than they were. So first of all, there was only one over frequency and only one under frequency in 1547, 2003. And there were, these frequency bands are wider, and the trip times are like you see for OF1 and UF1. Those are much, much, much longer than they were in the previous standard. One other thing that's critically important to remember is that 1547, 2018 has a band in which you are required to stay online. In other words, like in 1547, 2003, the under frequency trip was 59.3 hertz. But if you wanted to trip at 59.8, for example, to give yourself lots of margin to make sure you tripped at 59.3, that was allowed. That's no longer allowed.
Wider and
longer
duration, except for the 0.16. That doesn't seem like a whole lot of time.
No. Yeah, you see those are for very wide frequency deviations.
Yeah, then Michael, in since we've had to deal with California Rule 21 advanced inverter functions, the old 1547 2003 values were essentially, you must trip here plus or minus. Then they added 2014 that allowed for kind of like a extended range, for the ride through that California Rule 21 implemented. So when you say previous values, we've all been for the last, since 2017, we've all been meeting the California Rule 21 ranges of settings for frequency.
Yeah, Steve, that's a very good point. Yeah, when Art said the traditional settings, I was referring to 1547 2003, but you're right. We really haven't been using those for a while now.
Right.
I want to make sure that anybody else in the audience gets a chance to ask questions, right? And make sure that you're understanding where we're at. So feel free at any time. You can raise your hand or you can just kind of pop up on the screen.
So Leon has had some comments in the chat. Leon, did you want an opportunity to ask questions about various jurisdiction interpretations, or do you want to speak up at this point, even if it's not related to this slide? Maybe he's had to leave. Okay. Oh, he's still on. Leon, are you there? You're on mute.
Well, I'm looking at these questions, and I think that maybe we should wait until after we get through the slides, and then because these are kind of like universal questions.
Perfect. Okay,
right.
We'll hold off.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Let's see. Moving on to the next slide. Oh, not yet. One more little note I had here is kind of like the same as with abnormal voltage. We need to coordinate with the various New Mexico utilities. And with transmission planning, the difference here with the frequency is we have, I think, we think an even greater need for coordinating with transmission planning more so than with voltage. Okay, and the next one is just enter service and the enter service ramp rate. I kind of just lumped those two functions into one slide. And this slide, I didn't really spruce up much for this presentation. It really just kind of contains some notes that I took with the group earlier this week. And it's mostly really on the ramp rate. I mean, yeah, we're going to want the enter service function. That just basically is what makes the inverter interconnect. But a ramp rate is where it doesn't just go full on from, generating from 0 watts to whatever, 5 megawatts, 10 megawatts. You don't want it to just slam on. You want it to kind of step through as it interconnects, right? And then there was a discussion on normal ramp rate, which is not in the standard, that seems to be needing to be discussed for batteries. That's what ESS is, energy storage system. So basically battery systems. I guess I really don't have much to say on this one. So I would look to the group for anything that should be added. This is the last slide that I have for the presentation. The next one is just thank you, along with showing appreciation to those who contributed. But anything that should be added that you can think of?
Well, let's talk about this this last issue about taking consideration of storage operations. It's far more important right now in California because they've got a lot more storage, right? And it's having an impact on the system. But I'd like people to consider what we should do in eventual time when storage is a much more important component of the New Mexico system. If it's not accommodated in the actual standard, is there something that we have to do that's different? We may not have that answer yet, but I certainly want that to be part of our consideration.
Agreed.
I'm sorry, I interrupted Steve, and then Tayoko had his hand up.
I'll let Tayoko go first. I was just going to make a comment on the 500 kVA.
I just asked the question in the chat. In the last meeting, Brian brought up that there needs to be enough updates provided, otherwise there won't be the grid support to realize these features in DER. And I'm sort of interested in the practical part about implementing this, these settings, and how that would work. Since I understand it's been implemented in California, and I don't know about Minnesota. So I'm really directed at inverter manufacturers who are having to implement these things.
Yeah, I can answer that. So we've been using, like I said, we've been certifying to 1741 SA, supplement SA, which is based on California Rule 21 requirements that were advanced inverter requirements that were mandatory as of 2017 for the phase one. And phase one always included, internal ramp rates, right? So most of your equipment has these functions that are on the market now and have been on the market for the last number of years, are all 1741 SA certified based on California Rule 21 advanced functions. So, whether you leave normal ramp rate in here because you want it or take it out and just have inter service, I have no idea. Maybe Michael can explain why 1741 or 1547 decided to leave out normal ramp rates. But I would believe most equipment can do it now that's on the market, that has been on the market for a number of years.
Yeah, to the question of why normal ramp rates were not specifically discussed, I don't know that I really have a good answer for that. It was indirectly discussed through the vehicle of rapid voltage changes and quote unquote flicker. A lot of things get lumped in with flicker that technically aren't, but we'll go ahead and use that term anyway. So the inter service ramp rate is when you're first starting up. And as Travis pointed out, there's two options there. For larger systems, you have to limit how fast you ramp from your starting zero up to whatever your full power is at that moment. For smaller systems, you're allowed to come online faster, but you're supposed to randomize the start time so that, like, for example, if I have, a couple dozen smaller systems on one residential feeder, they don't all start at the same time. So the objective, again, is to try to, limit slamming the voltage around and let the utility regulators keep up with it.
Yeah. Just a point on that randomized, we need to make sure that's clear that that's an allowance for equipment that can't do a ramp rate. The preference is a ramp rate. So we don't want to we want to make sure that somebody doesn't mandate that you have to set all your equipment for randomized delay, right? Because that's an allowance, not a requirement. Allowance if you can't do the ramp rate.
Okay. Sounds good. Okay, so that's all I had, I think. Unless I missed anything, just wanted to say thank you to everyone in the subgroup, and also wanted to show appreciation to those who contributed. Mike, Brian, and Midhat, thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Travis and Michael and Brian and Midhat and Steve for your contributions on this. The real world, right? What's going on out there? I think that we can get to some of Leon's questions, and really it boils down to exactly what we need to be talking about, which is, are there considerations that should be specific to New Mexico? And based on the conversation that we just went through, what I'm hearing is that IEEE 1547 2018 is the standard that is essentially what is allowed. And then there are some considerations within this particular to geography or location on the system, whether it's transmission or distribution, that might require separate settings, right? So first of all, I'll say, is that a correct way of characterizing the overall context? Okay, haven't lost you yet. In particular, it seemed to me that of all that we talked about, the difference between having things enabled and disabled is a choice that you can make, and there's a reason for disabling some things because it essentially puts the emphasis on the active settings that you want, okay? And in particular, of everything that we talked about, the abnormal voltage and the abnormal frequency are the two areas in which there seems to be a strong rationale for having allowable settings, but the utility establishing parameters that might be tighter or shorter or whatever to fit their circumstance. Okay, so that's what I'm getting at this conversation. Is that correct from your point of view, Travis, Steve?
Well, I'll clarify that. Yeah, you're right about the voltage and frequency settings. They have settings too, but every one of the other functions have parameters that can be adjusted. So each of the functions that you can activate or deactivate, that's one choice. Then within those functions, like volt var, there's various setting ranges for the different parameters. And those are all the things that will be listed in the IRP file. You know, of each function will be listed in the IRP file, and it'll say activate or deactivate. And if you activate it, you'll have to fill in each of the parameters. You know, so the standard identifies the default parameters for those functions, but you have the ability to adjust a lot of those, and the utility can make that decision based on the site or, you know, all their interconnections.
Okay. You had indicated that there were some differences, whether of opinion or technical positioning between the utilities and the manufacturers that are being kind of worked out now. I guess the concern from a policy point of view is this purely a utility call? I mean, do they get to make those choices without input from outside parties, trusting that, you know, they're doing it purely to maintain reliability on their system? Or is there something else going on? And is there a forum within EPRI's development of this tool that allows for back and forth to come up with something that is palatable to all parties?
That'll be based on your rules from the PUC or whatever legislation to say what their authority is to change these settings. So that's what I'm saying. All your main requirements and the structure of what Travis did can be in the rules, but then you need to explain, okay, when you say this is the setting for the trip, this is the volt var, use these default settings from the standard, you need to explain that what the utility has authorization to adjust, that based on site conditions, they may change from those default values.
Okay, so I'm just going to point out a practical point of view, which is our commission, like a lot of commissions, are not technically proficient in this stuff and have not had experience in this stuff. So how are regulators making this call?
Well, I'll give you an example of California and Hawaii. They have the kind of just what you're doing, what Travis put together. They have all the basic requirements. You'd be 1741 SB certified, IEEE 1547 compliant. Here's when it's, the deadline for that. And then they list each of the functions and they list their default settings. But it's also noted that, those default settings and parameters can be adjusted through the utility.
Okay. And to your knowledge, do the utilities notify the commission of those settings? Or is it just built into their interconnection agreements?
Yeah, it's built in. So for Hawaii, we specifically talked about this because if you want to try to change the PUC rules, that's a long process, right? And if you have site-specific settings that you really need, the utility needs, they need to have the flexibility to do that quickly, and that information exchange needs to be standardized. And so that's why we created these IRP files. And the standard 1547 does require you, as us as a manufacturer, to certify our product for these parameters and adjustment ranges. Okay, so we provide the utility our certification record that has all the results reporting of all the functions that were tested and the ranges of adjustments for each of these parameters. And then they should have the right, if we don't meet one of these parameter adjustment ranges, then we're not fully compliant to 1547. We have to note that okay, we're limited to this range of adjustment. And they'll compare that to their needs. And if that equipment doesn't meet their needs, then you're probably not going to get it interconnected.
Okay. What from a regulatory point of view, I'm just having to be wary of arbitrarily setting standards that are far more stringent than would be allowable under the standard. And what is the guard against that? So I know California has gone through this for years with a very large stakeholder process in order to reach agreement, and then the commission makes decisions based on these things. Our commission really would need a lot of hand-holding and would have to have a lot of confidence in the fact that the utilities are doing this for good, solid technical reasons rather than just to prevent people from interconnecting, honestly.
Right. Yeah, so there may be some functions you might want to like you might want to limit their ability to like 1547 through the interoperability requirements. If you establish a communication with the utility, then they have the power at any time to deactivate the system, right? The PUC needs to kind of think about how that's controlled if it gets out of hand. That me as a consumer or customer having a DER site, all of a sudden I start looking at, well, they've been limiting my power output to 50%, or they've been deactivating me during key times. There should be some kind of complaint process there if it gets too out of hand.
We have PNM technical representatives here, and of course Travis. I don't see El Paso, but do you guys know if you're participating in this EPRI URP project? It would be interesting to know that, or if you're waiting until.
This is Leon. I wanted to add a comment. There is instances or cases where the smart inverter functions do not suffice to mitigate the issues that arise from the interconnections. I just want to note that there as well.
Sure, and I think that's exactly what we're talking about, is defining those circumstances and allowing for the utility to have possibly more restrictive settings for those circumstances, but so that people understand it, so that people have the information going into it, and it doesn't seem like an arbitrary decision.
Leon, would it be possible for you to give us an example of a situation like the one you just described?
In cases where the over voltage for example, cannot be mitigated by the functions in the inverters, where it would require that a system improvement like a voltage regulator or tap change at the substation might be necessary.
This is Frank too. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Also, what hasn't been considered is that the more of these smart inverters you put in, it is time varying. It's not a static adjustment. It is time varying through the day. So you would have to actually go back and reassess all those smart inverters for a new adjustment. They're not stationary and will last. And I noticed that in one of the things, okay, I can set it for 1 year. Well, it would be nice if I could statically adjust it 1 year and it'll be set. But the grid with multiple inputs is extremely time changing, time varying. So it's not like I'm going to set this one and let it go. Every time you add more cogen, it changes the characteristics of the feeder. So thus everything needs to be changed.
Yeah, and that's a part of the reason why, like, for example, we're suggesting using volt var instead of fixed power factor, because there's a certain amount of closed loop reactive capability there, so it can adjust for some of those kinds of things. You're right that doesn't necessarily do everything. You may still need some other adjustments, but that's the reason for selecting, for example, that function, is to deal with the situation you just described.
Well, also, yeah, you have
Correct.
volt watt, you have volt watt too, but there's some things that maybe the DER systems, they're there to kind of adjust autonomously if they're creating the voltage rise, or other DERs on that feeder might be creating the voltage rise. They all maybe start limiting their power or reactive power support. But if it's something, some other reason that the voltage spike is there, then you're right, the DERs probably can't do a whole lot.
Correct. And you can, and what in a bigger sense, I can make those inverters do kVAR give. Unfortunately, that's going to reduce the production of the customer. And I don't know, it's more adds on. The bigger question is, do you want to go to the customer and say, I can add more cogen on, but the reaction is I got to lessen your active power output by making your inverter do more kVAR give, thus reducing your power. And in a sense, that hasn't even been discussed about. You're going to get some angry individuals that if we keep on reducing their power output, and we can add more and more, but eventually where does that delineate? Where it's like, well, I put in, I'm sure the contractors are looking, I put in a 7 kW system and now it's only with more and more cogen it's adding on, I can add more by increasing the kVAR give on the individual cogen. That person is going to get angry because now he's actually got like a 5 kW producing system that originally had a nameplate rating of 7. And so there is a limit. And then the bigger sense, that hasn't been discussed. That's what I wanted to say.
Yeah, Frank, they run into that problem in Hawaii where they've, really have the highest concentration. They kind of got isolated systems there. So what they've done is they implemented, and us as manufacturers, we're doing what's called self-supply systems and other things. So we limit the amount of export or limited export systems. So they can still generate that power if they got the loads there to use it. And the system controllers will match, try to match the generation with the load and then minimize how much it exports out to the grid if you have limitations that have to be established. So there are options.
Correct, but let's talk the scenario here and now. We going to have a scenario of community solar, which is 100% output. We have a scenario of net metering, which everyone would love to have, and then we're going to have a scenario of self-consumption. So, in a sense, it's a conglomeration of everything, and that's mitigating that and figuring out with the customer. Well, I'm sorry, you can't have net meter. We have to resort to inadvertent export. So this is part of the question.
Yeah, and those are
And yeah,
discussions that are going on in Hawaii and through the PUC, right? How they address that, what programs the utilities can establish. So yeah, those are kind of the growing pains that you'll have to probably address.
And
Unfortunately.
I've even heard Hawaii, I've talked to a utility, they had to interject KVAR devices because they had such high voltage rise on the secondary. So they went to actually installing KVAR injectables on the secondary, so, which is amazing. But that is a precursor to what's going to happen.
Do you really seriously think that we're ever going to have the level of penetration that Hawaii has?
Well, this is what I'm saying. We're trying to go 100% renewable. That's the ends to the means, isn't it? If we're trying to do that, then well, that's what I'm saying.
Anybody else? Okay. Were there other aspects, Leon, that you wanted to raise? You had a couple of comments. I think that we had a general discussion about them.
I think they were addressed in the conversation. Thank you.
Okay. All right. What I'm hearing is that, yeah, there are issues that we can see may not be inevitable, but we should certainly take into consideration as we move down the path. But that's no reason to not do anything. And I think that it is our charge to come up with positive ways of addressing those things without making them become the barrier that prevents us from progress. That's the regulatory policy way of looking at it, which is we're not going to be able to reach the goals that the state has established unless we get the system to accommodate the necessary means to reach those goals, right? So we're here as one of the efforts in that process in order to find solutions as opposed to just raising problems. Problems are good to understand so that you can find solutions to them. So I would just urge everybody to think about, okay, what does this mean and what can we do in order to overcome those? Jim Desjardins has his hand raised.
Yes, thank you, Art. I'm sorry, I got distracted there by a phone call that came in. But it sounds like you kind of said what I was planning to say, is that I see the advanced inverters as certainly as a solution, and I think we can set some kind of standards, because I understand what Frank is saying, and I appreciate that, and I think we all want to make sure that at the end of the day that our customers, and they are all of our customers, that this is a good solution for them and that they're happy. But I certainly think we can put together some kind of framework or guidelines to make that happen.
Okay, so I mean, that's part of it, is that we're not just going to hand the commission a set of tables, right, that they may not understand. We really need to give them the narrative, the context, the how this helps us going forward, what things have to be taken into consideration and options for them to consider. So that's the task before us. Okay. It is now approaching noon, and I think that we had a pretty good substantive discussion. And again, thank you for the presentation. We kind of have a proposal on the table from Steve about how to go about this, and which is that in the rule you essentially cite the standard that you want. You could even include some of the specifics of the standard. We would have to decide how deep we go into that, but then make allowances for local conditions, that there is a tool that's being developed, and we would certainly encourage our utilities to get involved in that process so that it does provide the information to the installers about what's necessary in those particular locales. I don't know whether it's the PRC's job to get involved in that decision-making. I just want to, again, caution against arbitrary decision-making, that everything has to have a reason and it should be justified in case complaints do come up. Do we see a need to actually have a vote? We seem to have lost a number of people along the way just because of other commitments that they might have, about how to approach this, or just take it under consideration that what Steve recommended was probably the best way to go.
Art, may I make one brief comment here?
Yeah, Mike.
I was just going to say that, the primary decision that I think has to be made at the policy level are those category assignments, the AB for normal and the 1, 2, 3 for abnormal.
Right.
Like you said, Art, once you've said, we want to go with 1547, 2018 and the amendment, 1547A, 2020, then all the defaults and everything that we've talked about, that's all in the standard. We don't necessarily have to say any of that. And like you said, then the defaults and the ranges of adjustability are the keys. So, utilities have the flexibility to change those things within those ranges of adjustability. The only real key decision that we have to make at this point is which categories do we want, because that determines which ranges of adjustability and which functions are available.
Okay.
Hey, Arthur.
Yes.
This is Midhat. Brian and I are working on something that maybe, I don't know if you could table it up for next call, that maybe has some language that you can use in the rule. And if I can share my screen, maybe for just 1 minute, I can give you a snapshot of what a table that we are working on. Would that be okay? Just
Sure.
1 minute.
Margie's shaking her head. Yes, you should be able to share your screen.
Can you see it?
Oh, yeah, but not very well.
Let me visualize a little bit. So this is just like a 2-page, 3 pages. So it's still a draft right now, but maybe for the next call, we might be able to present on this. But essentially what I'm hearing right now, pretty much the first 4 rows here can have language that can go in the rule right now, which goes into the category assignments and some of the stuff that was presented on today. It gives you some background on what needs to be considered, the item that is in discussion, and the decisions that needs to be made at the PUC level. And you can see I've selected some of this. Again, it's just a rough draft, and we could tweak the dates as we want to. So we go through near-term items, and then here's the voltage regulation items that are selected by default. Then we go through the volt watt as well. And we do make mention of the EPRI's URP here as well. Some of the decision that needs to be made. And not all of these need to go into the interconnection rule. As I said, I think just the first few items need to go there in terms of the language, but these are sort of the decisions that need to be made as well. So it's a draft right now, but if you want to table it up for next call, we can clean it up and probably come prepared to present on this if that is of interest.
Yeah, I think that would be good. FFMWHNM6HF. You were going to say something?
That's Tom Key.
Hi, Tom.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, I'm on my cell phone because I've got another, there's a New York call going on, but I agree with what Midhat just said. I think it's a good approach, just, the sort of this adoption. There's a lot of details. And I just picked up this week, there's a TSRG, which is a similar, stakeholder activity in the Carolinas, and they created a document like that, adoption of 1547, 2018. So you could also include that, and maybe that would give you a couple different opinions along with the IREC document that Midhat just mentioned.
Okay, can you forward that to us?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll send it to you, Midhat. The other thing that occurred to me, we're probably not talking about energy storage so much today, but this idea of export limiting. There's the document that EPRI and IREC did together that Midhat, you could share that, no?
Yeah, and actually, as part of the decision matrix that I was showing, I have that referenced as well as part of it has language on RPA. So just a quick background, Arthur. We are working on a DOE project to streamline the interconnection of energy storage. So we're creating a toolkit, and we're partnering with EPRI and others. And the toolkit is coming out end of this month. So we'll be able to reference it next time we present on this.
Okay. Thank you. I think that can help set the agenda. So, Tom, do you think that you'll be able to be with us if we set another meeting in a month, which would be April 21st, to talk about what was it, North Carolina?
That sounds good. Yeah, there's the following week. There's we're finally getting back together. There's a IEEE T&D meeting, but yeah, that'd be perfect.
Okay, and then IREC will present a table like this. Would you like anybody? Would anybody volunteer to help talk about that table before it's presented to everybody else, or do we just want to go with your cleaned up version for next time? Any of the utility folks want to confer with Midhat and Brian in advance to talk about things that need to be addressed, so that we don't, so that we're prepared, basically?
Yeah, and for Excel and PNM and El Paso, look at the TSRG in the Carolinas, which is Duke and Dominion, and that might give some some thoughts to other. They had 102. I don't know, how many do you have on acceptance items, Midhat?
That's I haven't. Yeah, I don't have it tracked, but
anyway, it's developers working with utilities and under the regulators' involvement as well. So yeah, I think it's helpful to.
Is Brian on that one?
I don't think, Brian, you're on that. Oh, Brian's not on the call today.
Right.
Yeah,
he's not, but I think that's why he was on that one, on the other one.
I don't think he's on the TSRG, but I can check. They have a website. You can go look at it. You just have to say you live in North Carolina, because the other states of Duke don't have it. So anyway, I'll send the link and the document.
Okay.
And the document's basically downloadable, from the website. Actually, Duke maintains it. It's a little different than your effort here, where I think the commission is maintaining the website.
Yeah. Well, I would count on ours.
So this one be being just looked after by the utility, but it definitely is involving developers and regulatory.
Okay. All right. So what I'd like to propose is that we schedule another meeting for 4 weeks from now, which would be April 21st, and that doesn't interfere with the grid modernization webinars that we're having, because we're on every other. Matthew, can you quickly make sure that April 21st is not devoted to webinar?
April
Arthur, I
21st,
see
we're scheduled to cover
a hosting
hosting capacity
capacity
analysis
in
on the grid mod.
Yeah, hold on, Tayoko. Sorry, say again, Matthew.
April 21st, we're scheduled to cover hosting capacity on the Great Lawn.
Okay, so, but April 14th is clear then?
Correct.
Okay, that's 3 weeks from now? No, it is 4 weeks from now, I'm sorry. So April 14th would be the date that we schedule for another meeting, 10:30 to noon 30, Margie? Okay, Mid-Hat, if you can, just send Margie a paragraph to describe what it is we're going to be talking about, and then provide that revised table at least a week in advance if you can, so that we can share it with everybody in advance. It looks pretty dense. I would certainly encourage the utility representatives to talk with Mid-Hat and Brian on this so that you understand it, so that we can have a really good, oh yeah, April 14th. Yeah, I don't know what time that's going to be, Tayoko. I'll try and schedule it in the afternoon. All I can say is I'll try and schedule it in the afternoon. Okay.
So Leon asked a question about whether the outcome of these meetings, whether there's going to be a separate rulemaking or will it be incorporated into the current rulemaking on the rule. So did I capture that right, Leon?
Yeah. Sorry, I can't find the raise hand icon. Yeah, that captures my question.
So Arthur, can you speak to that?
Yeah, undetermined at this point. I think it all depends on how long it takes us to reach an agreement on this. And if it's a simple, just identifying the categories in the rule and citing other documentation and allowing for continued development of the appropriate settings outside of the rule, then that could be relatively easy. But I'm not really able to say precisely yet. It'd be easier to just do an amendment once the connection rule gets approved, but I don't know how long that's going to take. So,
Hey, Art, Tom Key here. I have an opinion about that, and that is that I think if your rulemaking that you currently have is just indicating we need to adopt the IEEE 1547 2018, that's what you need to do, and this would be pretty detailed, for the state to have to maintain, I think, right? It's it shouldn't be written as rules. It's more of a
well, I agree with that, and so the recommendation is just pretty much identify the categories that are appropriate that could be inserted into the current rule conversation, but it's a little, I have to say, it's just a little beyond me. I raised a caution at the beginning that I don't like to see really technical things in rules, because technical things have a tendency to change and the rulemaking process is very involved. So that's really kind of like something that we should take into consideration and make a recommendation about. Okay, any other business? So we're looking at the 14th, 10:30 to noon 30.
Arthur, one thing, do we have additional questions for the subgroup that Travis led? Do we have any follow-up action? What's the resolution of the subgroup, Travis and team? Do you want to clean up and modify based on conversations, the slide set that they presented? What's your preference? And what's Travis's idea?
I heard Travis say that he was going to make a couple of amendments before re-forwarding the slide deck to us, and I think that's it. I know that we have to develop a presentation at some point. We're not there yet. This is still input into whatever that's going to be.
Yep.
Does that work for you, Travis?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay.
I see Jim has his hand up.
Jim, your hand is still up?
Yes, I just put it up again. So a comment and a question. First of all, in addition to identifying categories, I think we should put in there also what the goals are. So if we can't have all the technical stuff, at least have in there what we're trying to do. And then I have a question in the, I believe in the original agenda or notes from the last meeting, there was discussion about having a pilot program, and I noticed that that has been taken out, and that is something that the Renewable Energy Industry Association is very interested in, and I was just wondering, what is the status of that?
We got an email from Roberto Favello of El Paso that said that it appears that we're moving forward with adopting these, so there's no need for a pilot. That's a little bit different than my understanding of what we were talking about. That the pilot that I would like to see kind of is the next step beyond this, which as we move further down the pathway of identifying the communications protocols and the possible control policies associated with the advanced inverter capabilities, that we have something like a pilot that we can start considering. So I'll leave the door open on that. It's just that the folks who said that they were going to work on that have withdrawn it.
Okay, well, thank you for that. But just to reiterate, the RIA would be very interested in being part of that process. And I think we could, through our members, add a lot to that.
Well, if you want to take it back to your members and give us a proposal on what a pilot would look like, I'm unsure on what's necessary to be piloted, but certainly taking into account the history in California, Hawaii, there are a lot of issues that come up that might need testing, and it could be the fact that there's different settings that are necessary under certain conditions, and then we identify where those conditions exist. It could be moving down the pathway towards communications and two-way interactions between the devices and the utility system that could be piloted, so that we get some operational. I'm just unsure of what would be appropriate.
Sure, understood. I mean, I'm thinking that maybe we can just put together a real basic kind of outline of what a pilot would look like and not get into the weeds right at this moment, but at least kind of have something to start with.
Okay, do you think you could have something like that for the next meeting?
Sure.
Okay. Toyoka?
Just to add to what Jim said, because we have 19 closed circuits, we did speak to a key person at PNM who was responsible for the distribution system, and they have over voltage concerns and issues right now on these closed circuits. So anything that we might be able to do to help understand the issues around closed circuits and what might PNM do to address that through this step.
Okay, so did they make it seem like overvoltage was the common thread on those circuits? No.
He just mentioned that one aspect only, and so we don't know.
All right, there was discussion about overvoltage settings and how they might differ based on the difference between what's allowable under 1547 and what, for instance, MISO is adopting. So maybe you can talk with Travis about that so that maybe we can pin it down. Okay. Marge, do you have a clear sense of what we're going to be talking about next time?
Yes, I think I do. And Jim, as you discuss the pilot, the other two individuals from last meeting who are interested in some sort of pilot, as Arthur said, were Roberto Favello from EPE. And I know, Leon, you had also expressed an interest in some sort of pilot. And even though we're moving forward with the adoption of the functions and the standard in IEEE, it might be that Leon and Roberto would want to share some insights and thoughts with you, Jim, on this pilot idea.
Yeah, I'm happy to reach out to the people that were originally involved. It seems that Roberto is not interested at this point in time, but we'll certainly reach out and see what we can do.
Sounds good.
Great. Anything else? Thank you all so very much for your participation. We really appreciate it. we certainly couldn't do it without you. And we'll see you in a month. Margie will send the information around when it's available, and you'll also get a meeting summary. Thanks much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.